The Lebanese expats living in Africa are practicing modern slavery against black Africans right now in Africa. Yes, you heard it right, the Lebanese living in Africa have been literally dehumanizing local black Africans in African countries, as this articles of an investigative journalist shed light on this ongoing tragedy. Please, share, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. As the FBA delineation movement is rolling on, I recently come to a conclusion that blacks in Africa and the Caribbean also need delineation. This is not optional but necessary. Black people in Africa and the Caribbean must delineate themselves from their elites or the African so-called leaders, politicians, and intellectuals who have not been useful but very detrimental or nefarious to Africa and black Africans for decades if not for centuries. These African so-called elites have been complacently and shamefully working with the European imperialists and others to undermine black Africans and loot Africa's immense resources. Not only has the whole African continent today become the property of the Europeans imperialists thanks to conspiracy of the African so-called leaders with Europeans, but it also becomes a new ground for other foreign entities such as the Chinese, Indians, and Lebanese to practice openly modern slavery. We all know that the so-called leaders in Africa and Caribbean countries disdain their own people and have been undermining their own nations. Like many immigrants, the white establishment in the United States choose to represent the foundational black Americans. The African so-called leaders are not chosen by Africans themselves but they are selected and imposed on Africans by the European imperialists through rigged elections or systematic barbarism. This is where the delineation movement is necessary and unavoidable for blacks in Africa and the Caribbean. By the way, can anyone tell Professor James Small and others who dislike the FBA that blacks in Africa and the Caribbean also need a delineation movement or have to delineate from their so-called leaders and the elitist class? A Togolese investigative journalist recently shed light on barbarism the Lebanese in Africa have been practicing against local black Africans. He described unequivocally how these Lebanese expats living in Africa have been literally dehumanizing black Africans or practicing modern slavery, with the covert and open support of African so-called leaders, politicians, and intellectuals. This is, the Lebanese have been acting and committing with impunity. In the West African country called Togo, these Lebanese expats have been mistreating and dehumanizing black Africans so boldly that this journalist decides to speak out against the Lebanese and denounce their modern slavery against the Togolese. With complicity and the support of the dynastic, illegal, dictatorial, and barbaric so-called president of Togo, Fernasing Bey, the Lebanese expats in Togo have been practicing extreme violence and modern slavery against Togolese women and men. All these atrocities against black Africans are not happening right now in Togo only but also in all African countries. In this video, I'm going to focus more on explaining the article the Togolese investigative journalist published than commenting a video he also posted, as both his article and video about this tragedy are in French and his maternal language. His article describes in detail how the Lebanese expats and so-called employers have been mistreating the Togolese and also coercing local people's wives and daughters into having intercourse with them on the job sites. Some can blame these Lebanese as well as the Indians, Chinese, Europeans, and the rest for all these tragedies going on in Africa, but others can blame Africans themselves for allowing these tragedies to keep happening. What is really wrong with black Africans? When are black Africans going to wake up from their lethargy, passivity, and cowardice? Many evil projects the European imperialists have been carrying out throughout Africa are the direct cause of all chaos and tragedies we continue to see in Africa. The European imperialists have been encouraging their puppets or the African so-called leaders to trample on the laws and constitutions of African nations, to craft a legislation that deprive Africans of their fundamental rights and assets, etc. These evil projects, in which African so-called leaders and corrupted politicians are also involved in, have resulted in the total absence of the rule of laws and chaotic situations throughout the African continent. Can you imagine that the African so-called leaders and corrupted politicians have been knowingly creating famine and decimating their own people in African countries by banning African farmers from growing seeds from their own crops they have been harvesting for centuries? These African so-called leaders and corrupted politicians have been engaging in sickening and evil things by taking orders from their masters or the European imperialists. The same shameless African so-called leaders frequently evict their fellow black Africans from their ancestral lands and then give these lands to foreigners. Thanks to these African so-called leaders and corrupted politicians, the Europeans, Chinese, Indians, Lebanese, and other foreigners have more rights than black Africans on their own countries, and they constantly mistreat black Africans in Africa. For instance, in Togo, the Lebanese employers have been mistreating and sexually abusing local people's wives and daughters at the job sites with impunity. In Kenya, for example, the so-called president banned his fellow Kenyans from growing seeds from their own crops but forced them to buy GMO seeds from the Europeans. These are some of the diabolic things the African so-called leaders and corrupted politicians have been doing to their own people, and this is how evil the European imperialists have turned African so-called leaders and politicians into. There are many other unimaginable and insane things that have been going on forever in Africa. To all Africans on the African continent, I want to say this. It is high time you changed your mindset, or at least woke up from your sleep. You must fight back or confront these barbarians who have been invading and decimating you for centuries. You must stop being passive and coward if you want to be free or be respected by others. TOGO, sexual harassment, orgies, physical abuse, death threats, etc. This is how Togolese people are selling their brothers to the Lebanese at the new industrial plant or SNI in Badapi. The Togolese employees at SNI plant in Badapi must be saved. This is the cry of alarm that has been sounding throughout the country in recent days. Divaig, Amayabo Ephraim, Amayabo Ilolo, Pascal, Justin, Felix, Gogo, Paluki, Bayam, Amako, Kasegni, Danso. These are the faces of the modern-day Damato captains who, entrenched in the factories in Badapi, carry out the will of their Lebanese masters with unimaginable zeal and deliver their Togolese brothers to these new slave traders. Do you know what they are doing to their Togolese brothers in this factory in Badapi? Let's explore this together in this article. In a previous article published on our website, we revealed some of the practices employed by this infamous company. A company owned by Lebanese nationals who disregard all Togolese laws. Continuing our investigation, we discovered that even worse things are happening within these walls, with complicity of Togolese workers desperately seeking a meager earnings or living. At the SNI in Badapi, workers' rights, labor laws, and human dignity are not on the agenda of those in charge. Any Togolese person who, in search of their daily bread, unfortunately ends up at the SNI in Badapi, will realize they are in hell, confides a worker who has already been beaten at the factory. The company's managing director, Taleb Mazay, surrounded himself with his Lebanese brothers and Togolese colleagues to better control the workers, torture them, and simultaneously prevent them from demanding their rights. He recruited a certain Faisal as a supervisor, a Lebanese man, a sex offender, a torturer, and an undesirable figure who had been expelled from other factories in Lomé, but welcomed with open arms at the SNI plant in Badapi. This sinister individual assembled a team of Togolese clowns whom he uses to mistreat employees. They are generally supervisors who put pressure on workers, whose fingers end up being severed in the factory machinery. These workplace accidents are not reported to the National Social Security Fund or CNSS, and the injured workers are left without medical care. Physical abuse and torture. To punish certain employees who try to assert their rights in the face of all the injustices they suffer, these Togolese supervisors, on the orders of their Lebanese bosses, throw workers out into the dead of night without protection. This is the case, for example, of our colleague Ayad Yera who, for health reasons, was thrown out by Supervisor Danso. During that dark night, Ayad Yera was exposed to the cold and mosquitoes. This considerably aggravated his illness and led to his death on September 13, 2025, we learned from our source within the company. The negligence of the factory manager and the supervisors also caused the death of a worker called Toyi, following a seizure while on duty. Several workers died in the same way, she added. As for the Togolese supervisor Divaig, much loved by the Lebanese Faisal because of his zeal, he has a habit of physically abusing workers and even dismissing others from the factory without due process. The other Togolese supervisors Amayabo Ephraim, Amayabo Ilolo, Pascal, Justin, Felix, Gogo, Paluki, and Bayam use the same methods to make life miserable for their fellow Togolese workers. Faisal remains in the good graces of the managing director, Taleb Mazay, because of this team of torturers he has installed at the Badapi factory. Another, Abdullah Nimer, also Lebanese, who doesn't even understand French, the working language of the company, arrived in 2022 and was appointed factory manager. His working methods are violence and terror. That's how, on October 18, 2024, he posted a bizarre work plan designed to harm the workers simply because they were peacefully demanding better working conditions. He beat Togolese workers until they bled. He managed to injure and permanently disable some of them, our source revealed. But he was never held accountable. Another Lebanese supervisor, Hussein, also assaulted workers, even union representatives. Defiance of Togolese authorities and unfair dismissals. According to our sources within the company, these Lebanese are loudly proclaiming that they are not afraid of the Togolese authorities. They have even gone so far as to declare, according to the workers, that they have the Togolese justice system in their pocket. The CEO, by virtue of his economic power, has ordered his Lebanese compatriots never to respond to any summons, whether from the courts, the gendarmerie, or the regional labor directorate, reads a report produced by the employees on the situation within the factory. The report points the finger at a certain Amako, a Togolese lawyer who is fiercely defending these Lebanese expats and their misdeeds against Togolese workers. This lawyer is even encouraging the Lebanese to disregard the terms of the Free Trade Zone Agreement, according to our sources. As for Hussein, he unabashedly declares himself one of the biggest thugs in Lebanon. This led him to assault the union representatives, unjustly imposing 15-day suspensions and significantly reducing their monthly income, according to the workers' report. During working hours, the supervisor or his controlling associates act as enforcers for the workers. The slightest gesture from a worker results in a sanction or unfair dismissal, all this for a salary of less than $70 or 35,000 CFA. Many surveillance cameras are placed throughout the production areas allow them to punish the workers denounce. Faisal distributes letters of explanation haphazardly, which is a crucial problem for the workers. He has created penitentiary sections, a kind of concentration camp for those who aspire to change, particularly the union representatives and those who go against his wishes. He and the other supervisors use punishment or layoffs to drastically reduce workers' wages. The factory manager, Abdullah Niemer, takes pleasure in this practice. Sexual harassment of women and orgy parties at the SNI plant in Badapi. The dignity of women, even married women, is trampled underfoot. These Lebanese slave-owning masters, along with their Togolese accomplices, subject the Togolese female workers to sexual harassment. Those who resist are simply persecuted and even dismissed from the company. The Lebanese supervisor, Hussein, and his Togolese accomplice, Kasegni, organize orgies with girls forced to submit to their advances within the company. In a corner of the factory they have transformed into a sex den. Not only do they sleep with girls or married women, but, according to some of them, they also film their sexual acts. Any girl who works at the factory and doesn't accept their advances is persecuted until she is unfairly dismissed, our source indicates. Two other Lebanese men, Mazam and Majid, also join these obsessive individuals who view the women in the factory as sex objects. Immorality and dehumanization are the ills that workers in this company experience daily. The employees are crying out for help. They deplore the Togolese state's abdication of responsibility and its absence in the face of the hellish conditions they endure at the new industrial plant or SNI. This only encourages the Lebanese to continue these outdated practices. They are appealing to national and international institutions, particularly human rights and labor rights organizations, to intervene and rescue the Togolese workers from these inhumane conditions at the SNI plant in Badapi.
Je vous lis tranquillement l'article qu'on a publié et je vais faire un commentaire là-dessus. Togo, harcèlement sexuel, partouze, sévices corporels et menaces de mort. Voici comment des Togolais vendent leurs frères aux Libanais au sein de SNI de Batopé. Il faut sauver les employés togolais de la société Nouvelle Industrie de Batopé.
I would like to briefly comment the article we recently published. Togo, sexual harassment, orgies, physical abuse, death threats, etc. This is how Togolese people are selling their brothers to the Lebanese at the new industrial plant or SNI in Badapi. The Togolese employees at SNI plant in Badapi must be saved. This is the cry of alarm that has been sounding throughout the country in recent days. If we, the Togolese, don't wake up and take control of our country that is given to foreigners, we will soon become strangers on our own lands that are our properties. These Lebanese, who have already been mistreating and unaliving African women immigrants in Lebanon, will ultimately take over our country. It is abnormal that some Togolese have been collaborating with these barbaric Lebanese in mistreating and dehumanizing their fellow Togolese here in Togo. We must expose the treason of these Togolese against their own people and their anti-patriotism. We must also attach faces and names to these Togolese traitors in order to discouraging them from colluding with foreigners to mistreat and dehumanizing their fellow citizens. These Lebanese expats in Togo beat some of their Togolese workers until they bled, and they injured and permanently disabled others. These are the pictures of some of the Lebanese who have been torturing the Togolese and openly practicing modern slavery in Togo. With the complicity and support of our government, these Lebanese are also engaged in money laundering activities in Togo. Here is a proof of an official fiscal paper the Togolese government gave these Lebanese to transfer or move money out of Togo. Some of these Lebanese who arrived in Togo with a Guinean passport are then listed on this official paper as Gambian citizens.
Tortionnaire aya ko nyale e donc ke mele lo amea e o hole bato pe ayo tortionnaire ayo e libanais wa o de na gatona le joami e o hona qui tu e loi fiscale au tierbo parce que ngona mi so beno on a fraude fiscale on a fraude douanière et au tiers toi wa we pe na wanti yo na ne benu agent gbogbo le au tiers o ve hona ka le libanais o libanais o salaire no commission et technique, montre-nous, il est quoi qui t'en sait? Alors que, on a fraude fiscale, on a fraude douanière, on a évasion fiscale. Voilà. Au diagbagba kaka, au tiers banana, attestation fiscale, il y a nous des gâteaux le douanier. Attestation fiscale ADA. Document les mêmes moments. Attestation fiscale ADA. Attestation de régularité fiscale, enregistrée sous numéro OTR, machin, opération de transfert de fonds, doit servir uniquement. Donc, on en a au Maya, nous avons des gâteaux les doit servir uniquement opération de transfert de fonds, valable jusqu'au 31/12/2021. 2021, attestation, et vous balez. Le commissaire général des impôts, sous-signé, atteste que contribuable, numéro d'immatriculation, dénomination NSTTP, régime fiscal, recettes réelles sans TVA, forme juridique, société à responsabilité limitée, fabrication des matières plastiques, nom et prénom du directeur, Mazé Taleb, rapport, machin, nationalité guinéenne. Donc, Libanais, il y a une nationalité qui est dans les Togo, guinéen. Donc, et de la nationalité gambienne. Voilà, évano nationalité guinéenne. Et de la Guinée. Et de la Gambie. Et de la le Togo. Donc, les douaniers. Donc, les tours, on a évasion fiscale des cas. Puisque on doit avoir complicité au hôtel. Donc, on a attestation de régulation fiscale. Que vous avez dossier, que leur dossier soit prêt ou pas, on leur donne les attestations de régulation fiscale. Ils sortent l'argent du pays.
For Gnassingbé, the so-called president of Togo and probably the most brutal dictator in Africa right now. For Gnassingbé has even become an advisor to the so-called revolutionary leaders Assimi Goïta of Mali and Abdourahmane Tiani of Niger. For Gnassingbé seized power 20 years ago in a constitutional and bloody coup after the sudden death of his father, who was not just brutal but barbaric. For more than 60 years, the Gnassingbé family has taken Togo hostage, has been oppressing, depriving, and starving Togolese. As it reported, the so-called revolutionary leaders in Mali and Niger have suddenly become the adulators and admirers of For Gnassingbé because they have also been receiving millions if not billions of dollars of stolen money the Gnassingbé brutal regime has been giving out for almost 60 years to buy foreign support and to bribe high-ranking individuals, not to say anything about its several human rights violations. For the past 60 years, the brutal regime of the Gnassingbé family has also supported financially or enriched many politicians and individuals in West Africa, across Africa, and beyond in exchange for support. Many credible analysts, with deep understanding of politics and its ramification in African countries, already said that the brutal dictator Faure Gnassingbé has been acting as an informant within the newly formed Sahel Bloc AES for his French and American masters. Like his late father, Faure Gnassingbé is unquestionably an incompetent and worthless president who has been wasting Togo's resources, drowning Togo in colossal debt. Worse, the Gnassingbé's brutal regime in Togo has been torturing, murdering, starving, and enslaving millions of native Togolese for the past 60 years. It should be very clear now to everyone that the main problem Africa faces right now comes from its so-called presidents, politicians, intellectuals, and academics.